Hey, everyone out there. I'm Chris Carter. He's Paul Zeise, and we're here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for the Steelers post-game show. I'm in for Adam Bittner. Normally, he's in this role talking with Paul after the game. But we're here to talk to you about the Steelers and really, I guess, commiserate with Steelers fans because it was a beatdown of all sorts. 35-13. The Eagles outclassed the Steelers. Jalen Hurts, 4 touchdown passes, 19 of 28 for 285 yards. A.J. Brown, 3 touchdown receptions on the day. Kenny Pickett, 25 of 38 for 191 yards, 0 touchdowns and interception. The lone touchdown of the day for the Steelers coming when Chase Claypool threw it to Derek Watt. It was, there's a lot of things about this Steelers team that have gone wrong this season, but it's weird to say, and I was telling you this beforehand, Paul, it's weird to say, like, I felt like this could have been worse somehow. And I think I'm not sure if that's good or bad because there were some points I'm like, why aren't the Eagles just blowing the Steelers away at this point? Because they were clearly a far superior team.
Well, I mean, I think the big thing, Chris, is if anyone is confused as to just how far the Steelers have to go, watching this game and watching the Buffalo game probably is a good indicator that they are a long way from the top of the league. What's a little troublesome about this one, Chris, is outside of the new kicker, I'm not sure if I can really say that there were many positives to garner. You know what I mean? Like, usually you come out of a loss and you say, well, this went well or that went well. I mean, you got a couple of good plays from the defensive line. I thought that you probably saw Najee Harris run a little bit harder maybe in a couple of plays than we've seen. Pat Freiermuth continues to be a pretty good player for them. I'm having a hard time coming out here and saying, I try and always say, okay, what's the positives or what can we take away from this to build on? I mean, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm having a hard time with that. I don't really know that there's much to build on, so to speak, with this one, other than to say, okay, well, now you know how far away from being a top team you really are.
I mean, I agree with that because at least with some of the games with the losses earlier, you could say, like, when they lost to the Jets, it was like, well, Kenny got in there and there was some fight to him. And then even with the loss of the Dolphins, it's like, man, he blew it at the end, but like there were some moments where you were really thinking he was there. And in this game, it made me, this game, honestly, watching Kenny Pickett play, there were just obvious options that he just couldn't see in this game. And like a lot of people want to blame Matt Canada for that. That part isn't on Matt Canada. The part that is on Matt Canada, I think, is the fact that the offense can't come together. And I think it's behind the scenes getting these guys to buy into his system. But the play calls themselves, there's open wide receivers on a lot of plays that Kenny Pickett's not seeing. And I think this was what the Steelers were trying to protect him from initially by starting Mitch Trubisky. Was they wanted him time to for this offense to kind of figure itself out a little bit. And if it wasn't good, at least it would have some sort of identity. But they can't block for the run. Najee Harris, he takes what's there, but there's rarely anything there. You have Chase Claypool, who fights really well on some plays, but there aren't enough plays for him to get it. You have playmakers, but you're not getting them going. And now you have Kenny Pickett, when he's facing an overload blitz where the Eagles literally say, hey, this slot receiver over here is wide open, but you're not going to hit it. And he doesn't hit it. And I think that's the biggest problem, is that with this season, the biggest priority of the season, we knew that they weren't going to be contenders. If they were going to make the playoffs, it was going to be like last year where they kind of fought their way in and edged their way in at the last minute. But the biggest thing this season was to see Kenny Pickett's development. Could he become that franchise quarterback for the Steelers, and could he get the early stages of it? And that just hasn't shown any possibility of brewing. But before Paul comments, I just want to point out, anyone that's watching this on YouTube, Facebook Live, do drop comments in for questions. We will be answering them on this show for the next half hour. So right here on the Post-Gazette Steelers post-game show. But Paul, what's your impression of how Kenny Pickett has dealt with his first few starts?
Well, I mean, again, he's a rookie, Chris, and you see it takes some time. I mean, there was probably some time last year or the year before, whenever it was that Jalen Hurts was a rookie, that people started to wonder if he was the guy. And, there was it's a bumpy ride. It's not easy. And I think people don't understand how hard it is to play quarterback in the NFL. It's different. In college, the one thing in college, they had a really good offensive line and they had some great receivers that seemed to be running wide open. You know what? those throws, and I'm not taking anything away from Kenny Pickett, but those throws are not the same kind of throws you got to make in the NFL. So he's learning, and the windows are tight. You have to be pretty quick with your progressions and your reads. And to your point, Chris, you can't miss open receivers. You can't like miss them either by overthrowing them, which he did a few times, or just not even throwing it to them because you don't see them. So I know that there's a lot of people that it's weird with Kenny Pickett. It's like this polarizing argument that either he's he's a superstar or he's the worst player ever and should be benched. And it's kind of like you got to be measured with it and say, are we seeing progress? I think there's some things he's doing well. That first drive where they scored, the second drive where they scored the touchdown, that was a pretty good drive. I mean, he did some good things there. The one field goal drive I thought was a pretty good drive, and it stalled. But then you see the turnovers, holding the ball a little bit too long because he's trying to make a play, and you see him miss receivers, and you say, okay, he's got a long way to go. So the only way you can grade Kenny Pickett to me is he getting better? Is he progressing week after week after week? Are there things that he's doing better? I mean, if you're going to try and grade him on touchdowns and interceptions and yards and completions and even wins and losses, you're probably not being fair to him. And so I thought this was probably a tiny step backwards, Chris, but it's not going to be a straight line up. You know what I mean?
Right. No, right.
And the fact that they were playing a really good defense probably had a lot to do with it.
I mean, this defense, I pointed this out, in the North Shore Drive podcast with Brian Batko. This defense has an impeccable defensive front. They have one of the best cornerback combinations in the NFL, maybe the best cornerback combination in the NFL. I said all week long, there was a very narrow path to victory in this game. Like the Steelers were going to have to tightrope this walk, and to have a chance. And a part of it was going to be having to avoid Darius Slay and James Bradbury on the outside. Part of it would have to be finding a way to not let Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, and Jordan Davis impact this game along with Hassan Reddick. They absolutely were. And it's just, there's too many areas where the Eagles were able to just to beat out things with the Steelers. And listen, like in the moment, there's times where Kenny makes decisions. I don't think that this game is defining of who Kenny Pickett is. Like you said, like this is all about his progress. But it's like, man, you were hoping that there would have been opportunities where he could be like the lone kind of torch in the night there, where he could be like, okay, there's a bright spot. Like that kid is just overmatched right now. But he's making the good reads. And I think the problem is in that moment, you didn't see it. But again, it's a tough spot for any rookie to be put in, especially the quarterback. We have a question here from Tony Marchand on Facebook. By the way, you could drop your questions on our Facebook Live or our YouTube page if you're wherever you're watching. As Tony Marchand says, will any changes be made coaching wise? Paul, I don't know about you. I just don't see the Steelers flipping a whole bunch of coaching situations around until the end of the season, especially when you have a rookie quarterback in Kenny Pickett. Again, I know a lot of people, this is particularly about Matt Canada, but if you get rid of Matt Canada now, you then go to Mike Sullivan, who's had a terrible track record as an offensive coordinator as well. Then you're replacing him because he's not a good offensive coordinator. And then effectively you will give Kenny Pickett a third offensive coordinator by February. And it's just, I don't think that's the issue. And again, Matt Canada, the play calls aren't the problem that I have with Matt Canada. I think the problem is he doesn't connect well with these guys, in the meeting rooms. I don't think he's getting his message across there. And I think that you need a veteran OC to work with a young quarterback like that. But to me, I just don't see any changes coming, and I don't think that's even the issue. Like if you change things, I think you get the same results.
Yeah, and I think that the big thing about that is they could keep Mike Sullivan in place. So it's not. I mean, he's the guy that's working closest with Kenny. So if you're changing the offensive coordinator, I don't know that it's realistic in the season to do it anyway. Because how much can you really change the offense? I know it's happened in the past, and people like to point out that the Ravens did it once and won a Super Bowl. But for the most part, you've got a young team with a bunch of, guys that are figuring it out. Your offensive line is still trying to figure it out, and there's obviously some issues there. Matt Canada is not ideal. He's not really probably even qualified to be an NFL offensive coordinator in many ways. But I don't know that changing him really changes a whole lot about this season. I think that you just kind of ride it out. I think that the Steelers are very hesitant to make that kind of change anyway, you know. So, but but put it this way, Chris, if the reason you're not going to fire him is because you're afraid of having too many coaches for Kenny Pickett, that's silly.
Right. And I don't think that that's the situation there that the Steelers are actually in here. Again, when I look at what's wrong with the Steelers, again, I see guys break open to the middle part of the field. I mean, heck, the one play, Pat Fryermuth standing in the middle part of the field, wide open, well schemed up, and he misses him. And part of this, again, is the game is really fast. Like when we say that, a lot of people said that about. By the way, thank you, Tony, for your question. Tony's other question here is, do we feel like they're going to pull Pickett and bring back in Trubisky? I don't think that's the answer either. You know that Trubisky's not the guy at this point. The only time you do that, I think, is if Kenny Pickett has like a 5 interception game, and you got to just like, okay, you know what, Kenny, we're shutting it down because you're hurting yourself at this point. And I don't think Kenny's there. But again, when I look at this Steelers offense, and I see that there are a lot of problems with it. But right now, like you said, you pull Matt Canada, what play calls are changing? Because again, when you look at the plays that the Steelers made mistakes on, there's open guys. Like even the interception at the end of the Dolphins game, Deontay Johnson has the back part of the end zone. If Kenny Pickett throws it to the right spot of the field, he has a chance to make a play on the ball, but he throws it to the front pylon, and the cornerback's like, oh, that's where I was setting up. Thank you. And I think that's where if you're being realistic as a Steelers fan, you have to look at those and say, you know what? It's not just about play calls. And I know we love to do that in Pittsburgh, where it's always the offensive coordinator. Like, for example, I also wanted to bring this up when you brought up the Ravens. The Ravens changed offensive coordinators the year that they won the Super Bowl last in 2012. But leading into that, they were a 9-3 team with a 5th-year quarterback and an offense that knew who they were. And the backup the guy that they promoted to the offensive coordinator position was Jim Caldwell, who was an NFL head coach as well. So like, it's not nearly the same thing as Mike Sullivan couldn't get a job in the NFL for a few years. So it's like different situations. And Chris,
there. That might be a larger discussion. Is that why is the offensive staff loaded with some of these guys like Mike Sullivan, like Matt Canada?
That's a good question.
Probably wouldn't be hired by anybody else out there. And I think that's probably the larger discussion. Is that, if you're going to be a team that is going to, hang your hat on, well, we've got a defensive head coach, and we essentially have 2 other guys who, are one's a former head coach, but we've got 2 other defensive coordinators. Our defense is going to be a master's level, defense.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't you go out and hire somebody that's really, really, an experienced offensive coordinator? Let him bring in some guys that really know what they're doing and give yourself a chance. I would hope that's what the discussion is going into the offseason is, hey, what we're going to do now is offseason is we're going to clean house on the offensive side of the ball.
I agree.
And we're going to go out and we're going to rebuild our offensive staff to try and give our offense a chance. It's a little troublesome, though, and I know we're talking offense right now, but it's a little troublesome now that the master's class in defensive coaching basically couldn't figure out how to stop the Eagles passing game even a little bit today. And last week, I think if Tua would have been a little bit better, they would have hit they had a bunch of plays out there that were, there to be made as well. Maybe that speaks to, the fact that, like you talked about with the Eagles have 2 of the best corners out there, and it changes really how you play defense. But the Steelers, that might be a position they need to get better at in order to have a chance. So there's a lot of issues coming out of this game.
There are a lot of.
But I was going to say, Matt Canada is not the only issue, and I think there's a lot.
No, I agree that there's a ton of issues. You could point left, you could point right, you could point everywhere, and I think that's my biggest point is that we're pointing at one guy here as if the play calls are the biggest problem of this team. It's execution, because again, if there's an open man and he's not hit, that's not on the play call. If there's a wide receiver who drops the pass, that's not on the play call. This team isn't good right now. Their guys are making mistakes, and the guys who, and I think part of the issue for a lot of fans is they don't want to blame the people who they buy the jerseys for. They don't want to blame Kenny Pickett. They don't want to blame those players, and I get that because you're fans of those guys. No one buys a Mike Tomlin jersey. No one buys a Matt Canada jersey. But to your point, Paul, I think one of the biggest questions here about this was, when did they hire Matt Canada and when did they hire Mike Sullivan? They hired them when everyone kind of knew the Steelers were going to go through a rebuild process, and they said, you know what, your quarterback is Ben Roethlisberger. He's the old version of himself. We don't know what y'all are doing after that. I think a lot of the best offensive minds that are looking at, what jobs are out there, why would I touch the Pittsburgh Steelers at that point? We don't know if you're going to draft a quarterback. We don't know if Ben Roethlisberger is going to try to stick around for another year and be bad, which he was last year. And I think that if you're a young offensive mind, why would I go there? But now, maybe this season, and this is what I'm saying, wait till the offseason, like you said, scrap the offensive staff, rebuild, put some new faces in there, and get some new leadership on the offensive side of the ball. And then someone might say, you know what? Kenny Pickett didn't have a great year or nothing like that, but that kid has fight to him, and I want to coach that guy. And you know what? There's some play. I like that George Pickens kid. I like that Pat Freiermuth kid. And Najee, I want to play with these guys. And maybe you get some of those offensive minds.
You made a mention of a name. How about Jim Caldwell?
You know what? If he's free and available, you could use a person with his veteran coaching experience. And that's my thing. Get a vet. And as much as some people say, well, get the new young Mike McDaniels guy. I'm like, I'm not so sure that's the guy that you need right now with the young QB that's still trying to find an identity in the offense. I think you need a guy that can settle him down, and then maybe eventually you go get that guy. But I think you need a guy, Todd Haley. He was able to grip Ben Roethlisberger up and say, hey, Ben, you got to take the short passes. You're going to take the quick passes. You're going to extend your career. And he was a veteran. He was a former head coach. Caldwell, former head coach. I think that's an interesting option. We're going to get to some of your comments here. We have Crystal Privet, who says, Najee Harris says every Friday, trust the process. What in the HE double hockey sticks is the team process? How can one believe that they're almost there? I hear the frustration. And again, you're Steelers fans and you're mad. You're watching this game and you're furious. And you have every right to be, because your team's getting their butt kicked. But if you're a player, you can't come out and say, yeah, there's no hope. We don't believe in anything we're doing here. That's what players are supposed to do. They're supposed to go into every game fighting and doing what they can to make plays and to do what's in front of them. The problem is, I think certain players are doing it more than others, but as a whole, there are very few plays where you can look across the board and say, hey, 11 guys did their job. And good offenses like the Eagles, that's what you're seeing happen when they get those big plays.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you watch the Steelers, Chris. I really don't. I really try hard here not to be the guy who just goes with lazy narratives and this and that and the other thing.
Right.
But watching the offensive line, right? Every time I honestly think Chooks has actually had a pretty decent season.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's actually probably their best offensive lineman. Right.
I agree.
There are times when it feels like they're getting what they thought they were going to get out of James Daniels. There's other times when they don't. Mason Cole is what he is. I mean, you'd think he's a stopgap for a year or two, and that's it. Kevin Dotson, to me,
I agree.
I don't know what he's doing
not getting
out there, but he's better than Kendrick Green. So you got, and then Moore.
Dan Moore, yeah.
Dan Moore is real inconsistent. But here's the thing. How many drives do they have where there's a penalty on one of those guys?
Yep.
Where there's a illegal man downfield, where there's or an ineligible man downfield, where there's a holding, where there's a procedure, where there's something. Forget about the leaks they have and the couple of sacks they've given up and things of the such. That unit has not gotten together yet. It's week 10. What is it? Week 8 now, going into week 9. At some point, they've got to figure it out, don't they?
They have to, and they at least avoid those mistakes. Like, you know what? Like, there was a play where Kevin Dotson just got whooped by Javon Hargrave. Well, you know what? Javon Hargrave whooped a lot of people when he was with the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's going to happen. But what you can't have happen, like you said, is 9 penalties for 60 yards. And yes, the Eagles also had 8 penalties for 60 yards, and it wasn't like that was the lone problem in this game. But it is a problem in this game when you're not a good offense and you can't do the basics right. And I think that's what I think early on, Pat Meyer deserved credit for getting this offensive line to at least do the basics. They protected the quarterback. They kept him clean for the most part. Like, Mitch Trubisky didn't have to face too much pressure week in and week out. But as the season's gone along and they face some better defensive fronts, they've gotten taken advantage of. And when they start making mistakes, you see them, if they lose on the field, then they're losing with the mental mistakes. And that's when those things start to compound. I do wonder if you see this team kind of rebound a little bit better, because the second half of the schedule is much more manageable of the teams. Like there's not an Eagles on the rest of the schedule. There's not a Bills on the rest of the schedule. But you get a game where you're blown out like this, and I look at this and I say like, man, you know that you're not on that level. But if you're the Steelers, you need to find the guys who can hang around and fight and compete. And that's the bottom line right now. When you're in a season, when you're 2-6 and all hope seems lost, you need to find who are the guys that you want to take with you, because there's guys in this roster that won't be here the next time the Steelers are competitive, whether that's next year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. But there's guys that you need to find when you're having a bad season, who responds in the tough moments, who responds in the bad moments, and who fights back in those moments. I think that's the biggest thing that you need to find right now.
Right, absolutely, and there's a lot of those guys out there that I think, honestly, the next 9 weeks, Chris, is all about figuring that out. It's all about figuring out who it is that you feel like going forward can be a big part of your future, going forward can help you, win games again. Because really, if you think about it, you've got a number of young guys out there that you really have to, to find out what you have. And I would include Kenny Pickett in there. I think it's, reasonably clear that you probably, are not going to go the long haul with Najee Harris as your running back. I think, obviously you'll keep him through his contract, but what you've seen versus what they thought they were going to get is probably not anywhere close. But these young receivers, I mean, I think George Pickens is really, really good, obviously.
Yeah.
But Deontay Johnson,
that's like he has not lived up to the contract that they gave him.
Yeah, these guys, Chase Claypool, even these guys are inconsistent. They make plays, they also disappear. I do think a guy you can say you can count on is Freiermuth, except for guy gets hurt all the time. So I mean, when he plays, he's productive. He's a good player. But there's a lot of questions about this team, up and down, across the line, on both sides of the ball. This is one of those things where the next 9 weeks probably are going to determine a whole lot about how they go forward.
I want to pose a question to you, Paul, because we got Chuck Huffman here who says the Steelers are only going to win three or four games. And, I look at that, or 3 or 4 more games, excuse me, which is totally possible. This team is not proven to be too much reliable in anything right now, but they're coming out of the bye week. They have the Saints at home coming up. And, I look at that and I wonder, when you look at the schedule, and I'm trying to pull it up here as a shared screen in a minute here. So excuse me while I work on that. But you look at the schedule with TJ Watt back. I mean, this game, it's easy to say after blowout losses like this and in the Bills. They were never in there. Oh, Chuck wants to clarify. Thank you, Chuck. He said no, 3 or 4 games total. So Chuck thinks they will win 1, maybe 2 more games the rest of the season. Thank you for clarifying that Chuck. But I want to look at the schedule real quick with you, and I want to say, hey, what is the reality of this of the rest of the season here, Paul? Because I look at at the Steelers, and I say, man, I think that there's some beatable teams in this stretch, and here we go. I finally pulled it up here. But in this rest of the schedule here, Paul, you got the Saints and the Bengals at home after the bye. Neither of those teams have been all that too impressive moving forward. I'm trying to zoom it up so that people can see it better here. But that is your second half stretch here that the Steelers are going through here. Paul, are there any games that you think the Steelers have a fighter's chance to win those games?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would. The one thing I would disagree with you a little bit. I think the Bengals are starting to figure it out.
They are starting to. I agree with that.
I think the Bengals are a team. So here's what I would tell you. I think they get to 8 losses just because I feel like they will lose to the Bengals and they'll probably split with the Ravens.
Yep.
So if you split with the Ravens, you lose to the Bengals, that gives you 2 more losses. You're 8 losses, right?
Yeah.
The rest of that schedule, I'm not saying they're going to win all those games, but, the Saints today, I guess they did. They shut out the Raiders. They have Andy Dalton, who last week threw 5 interceptions.
Yeah, geez.
The Colts are a total disaster, especially on offense. In fact, I think today they started a 6th round pick. Who's a
Sam Ellinger,
6th round pick, right? who because Matt Ryan has been such a disaster for them. The Falcons, they've got Marcus Mariota, which means they really probably have no other quarterback. They really, they're not scary. Carolina, now the one thing I will say is Carolina's got, Temple's finest, PJ Walker playing quarterback. So maybe
You had to get that in there, didn't you, Paul?
Now, of course, I got to get my Temple. I mean, come on. People give me a hard time about Temple. It's like, listen, man, we have very little to actually brag about ever. So if there's something good I can say about Temple, I'll say it. That being said, the Panthers are terrible. So that game is one that they could easily win. Who's that? The Raiders got shut out today by the Saints.
Yeah.
I don't think I have to say anything more about that. I mean, is McDaniels even going to make it to that game?
Good question.
The one interesting one, obviously, is at the end of the year, they'll be playing Deshaun Watson and the Browns. That's the one interest. So that to me, if Deshaun Watson by then found his stride, maybe that's a tougher game as well. But this second half of the season, there's plenty of opportunity for the Steelers to get back into it.
I agree with that sentiment. I think that when you look at this at the second half of the season, again, you look. I'm going to scroll back up to some of these early games. Even without T.J. Watt, if they don't let what's his face Nelson Aguilar completely moss Ahkello Witherspoon, and that seems to be a theme this season. They might win that game if the Cleveland Browns, if Mitch Trubisky takes a lot of those more open options in that game, they might have had a chance in that game. The Jets, they were a two dropped interceptions. Either catch either one of them, they might win that game. And those are 3 games. And the Dolphins, if Kenny Pickett puts it to the back of the end zone, these are all games where they were 1-2 plays away from maybe winning those football games. And they weren't even clear. They were never close against the Bills. They were never close against the Eagles. But you look at some of those teams. I agree. The Bengals are a different team right now. But I wonder, how will they start to look with Jamar Chase out? And I will say this. Chuck keeps bringing the jokes here. He said Witherspoon gets burned more than Freddy Cougar. Witherspoon is getting absolutely toasted. And here's the one thing, and Paul, I want to say, like you talked about the defensive, scheming and everything. The last touchdown that went to Pascal, that was a defensive. Terrell Edmonds completely miscommunicated. The other 3 were just, Minkah Fitzpatrick on the first one needs to come down with that interception. It was double teamed, perfectly situated. You get the jump ball. He doesn't high point the ball, and A.J. Brown beats him for it. The other 2, though, to A.J. Brown were just perfect throws down the sideline. Ahkello Witherspoon against one of the best receivers in football. And this was a problem, like you said, and back to what you said about maybe they need to do this, but going into the season, I said this team needs a real number 1 corner. Right now, I think they have a bunch of number 2 corners who can sometimes take on the number 1 job if they don't face a superstar wide receiver. But I think you saw in this game when they are asked to do that, it's going to be some tough sledding if that player's on.
Absolutely, and I think that was one of the things I said at the start of the season when everyone was talking about the most expensive defense and all the other stuff. I said, the only issue I have with them is I feel like they don't have a number 1 corner. They don't have that guy that can shut down, top receivers. And, I think that while Terrell Edmonds is a solid safety, a good safety, I don't know that he's enough, with him and Minkah Fitzpatrick. I think you've got good safeties, but we've seen what Minkah does well. I just don't know that they have enough when they play against teams that have a good quarterback and really good receivers. And we've seen that that's been their Achilles. Now you would hope with TJ Watt coming back, there'll be less time to throw. And therefore maybe some of these guys that they're facing down the stretch. But what's good about really that whole stretch is outside of Joe Burrow, right? Let me just and maybe Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson. You know what? Yeah. I mean, the kid from the Colts, if it's still the kid from the Colts, of course, we haven't seen him play. I think today he's making his debut right now as we're talking. I mean, the kid from the Colts, usually the Steelers feast on, rookie quarterbacks. And I get it. He's not a rookie, but he essentially he's a rookie. I mean, for the most part.
I get you.
Marcus Mariota is, what he is. Andy Dalton, the Steelers have seemingly been pretty good against Andy Dalton.
They've had a lot of wins.
Derek Carr either forgot how to play football or he just really hates Josh McDaniels and wants to get him fired because he's not had a good year. I mean, if you look at it, seriously, the good news is they're only outside of Joe Burrow and maybe Deshaun Watson and I guess Lamar Jackson, but he's a different kind of player. They're not going to see guys that throw the ball like they've seen in this first part of the season. So, we'll see what they learn and if they get better in certain areas. But I just think, Chris, this is one of those seasons where they've got enough flaws that it's going to be hard for them to get on a run where they win 4 or 5 out of 6 or 5 out of 6 or 4 out of 5. I don't agree with who was it? What's his name? Chuck. I don't agree with that they're only going to win 3 to 4 games. I think they'll win. What are they, 2-6 now?
Yeah.
It wouldn't shock me if they finish like 5-4 and end up like 7-10 or something like that.
I can see that.
I don't think that's unrealistic. Like I said, they'll probably split with the Ravens. They'll probably lose to the Bengals. That's 2 more losses. Maybe the Browns with Deshaun Watson back. I just don't see a ton more where you say that's definitely a loss.
I agree with that sentiment. And I want to get some of these out of the way and show that we are paying attention to what y'all are saying. We got Brian White here who says bench Kenny Pickett. He isn't the answer. At this point, it's like I don't know about you, Paul. Like, you don't bench the guy that you hope is someday the answer. You let him fight through it. Paul, you've been around longer than I am. How many quarterbacks have you seen start their careers on rough situations on bad teams and then eventually figure it out?
Yeah, that's what happens. It's all part of the process. It's all part of growing, and learning. A lot of guys, their first year, even if they're on good teams, they struggle. Very rarely do you have a situation, and I hate when people try and compare it to Ben's first year.
Jeez,
Ben's first
not
year,
even close.
They had a Super Bowl defense.
Yep.
They had maybe the best offensive line in football.
Yep.
He had really, really good receivers.
And
Jerome
Bettis
and company to run the football. And he had Cowher, who was a very, very smart coach when it came to let's just not let this rookie beat us. And if he doesn't beat us, guess what? Nobody's beating our defense if they're not getting short fields. So let's play smart. We'll let him make some throws when he needs to. We've got the weapons on the outside of the field. And I think, we've got the weapons on the outside of the field. We've got a really good running game. Let's be patient and let's play. And they had the luxury of doing that.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is very rarely does a rookie quarterback step into that kind of situation. Most of the time, a rookie quarterback, especially a first-round pick, he steps into a situation that's terrible because that's why they were drafting so high, because they were bad. And so, to me, you got it. And benching Kenny Pickett makes no sense right now because if nothing else, you want to figure out what you have with him by the end of the year. Not that you'll know not that you'll know the whole story, but you'll have a pretty good idea if you keep letting him play, especially your 2-6 team. And no offense, but okay, let's say if by some miracle you slop together 9 wins and get to the playoffs, you're not winning the Super Bowl this year. We've seen that you're nowhere close to the top teams in the conference. So to me, doesn't mean you throw the season away. But you let Kenny Pickett play and you grow with him and you grow as he makes mistakes and whatever else.
No, I agree. You got to let him grow. You got to let him play. And again, this year, the objective of this year was to see if Kenny Pickett could be the answer, was to see if he could be the guy that could grow from this. And you got to take your lumps. I think even Mike Tomlin, there was a clip of him talking to Kenny Pickett after he threw the 2 game-losing interceptions late in the fourth quarter to the Dolphins, and he said, "Keep your head held high. You got to fight through these moments. You got to keep fighting past these moments." And I think it could be very interesting for Kenny Pickett's career. You look back at the games that he's come in. He played in the first half against the Jets. His first start is against the Bills in Buffalo, one of the most impossible situations you could be put in this year in football. He gets a win over the Buccaneers that he doesn't even finish because he got concussed. Then he plays the Dolphins the week after that. Then he plays the Eagles, the best team in the NFC right now. That's just uphill of a climb that I think you could start, uphill of a way that you could start your climb in the NFL if you're Kenny Pickett. And maybe this is like, it's like, okay, you got your lumps in now. You've experienced what the toughest things are. I think that they have to hope is, can he be resilient? And I think that was something that he did a lot at Pitt, Paul, and you and I both saw that. There were times where he was completely overmatched. I mean, there were several times Pitt was getting beat down with him in there, and he was still fighting through it, but he was just not in a good situation. And then the one year when Pitt had things lined up for him, he was able to go out there and be a leader and be the guy that you wanted because he had fought through all those moments. I think that's what the Steelers are hoping he can bring out there.
Right. And that's what you with a young quarterback, that's what you're trying to, it's all teaching moments now. It's all improvement now. It's all, are you getting better now? That's what it has to be. There are some people that are unrealistic and they think that it's going to happen overnight. It's just not. It's a really hard position to play in the NFL right now. So it's going to take a little bit of time. I'm not saying he's the answer or he's not the answer. I'm saying anybody that is making a definitive statement either way is kidding themselves.
Exactly. I think that's the only realistic thing that you can look at there is that, and like you can say you think he is and you think he's not, but if you're definitively saying that, oh, you've seen enough that this guy stinks, that this guy is great, you're just being emotional in the moment. Like you're not thinking with facts, you're not thinking with reason, because again, you could do that with so many quarterbacks who started out their careers in rough spots and didn't bounce forward. This has been the Steelers post-game show from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Paul Zeise. Thanks for everyone for tuning in to the show. We're going to still have the Monday episode of the North Shore Drive podcast with Adam Bittner. He's going to take my place there. I'm Chris Carter. I normally host that show, but Adam's going to take my spot for that because I took his spot for this. He'll talk with Ray Fittipaldo, Jerry Dulac, Brian Batko, all of them in Philadelphia, talking to the players, talking to the coaches after this game. Go to post-gazette.com to make sure that you're checking out on all their stuff. Ray's going to have his grades, and then you can come right to this channel on YouTube for the Post-Gazette's YouTube channel to hear more about his grades and everything as he talks through with Adam. Thanks again for everyone for joining us. We'll be back right here on this channel with more as we go throughout the week on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.